welcome to episode 3 of season 9 in the Heartway Pastor and Missionary Caregiver podcast. I'm here again with Gabby, and we are in our season, Ministry Life After Dark, but before bedtime. And that's usually when we record this. So, today we're going to be dealing with the question, how can ministerial families get help while in the spotlight? They can't. No, it's not true, but there is some truth there. We're going to explore that today in our episode. So, I think there are different types of help that we can get more easily than others while in the spotlight, right? Pastor's family, missionary family. For instance, like spiritual support. You can get that through conferences. You can get that through other friendships with people in the ministry. You can go on retreats. Sometimes even Bible studies with the right group of people can be that spiritual support you need and that outlet you need and that encouragement you need where you can be open. For me, one thing that I can use in our church at Horizon that's helpful is the sprightly stroll and supplication that we do, which is where we just walk and pray together, and that's helpful for me each week for spiritual support, and small groups offer that as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's probably easier for the adults, like a pastor and his wife, to get spiritual support because there seems to be a lot of opportunities for them. Like there's lots of retreats and couples retreats and things offered, even, separate. There's men's events, women's events. I think it could be harder for kids though, because for example, you lead the youth at our church, and Hattie's talked about how it's difficult, or it feels weird to her to open up sometimes at youth group. I think there's like something funny that you're doing, like an opener or something that you're doing, and she was like, yeah, it felt really weird talking about this because my dad's sitting in the room. And people that know them, they're always around people that really know them well and have, even if they don't mean to, they have an underlying higher expectation for the pastor's kids sometimes than the other kids in the church. So I think one thing that has helped our family is that, and obviously I don't recommend this for every family, but for our family, Letty and Hattie go to a youth group that's not a part of our church. Has been something that's really helped her spirituality, even. Like she's grown she's grown a lot as a believer going to this other church's youth group.
Yeah, because she's not the pastor's kid there, or she's not a missionary kid there. She's just a kid. And so I think those atmospheres, if you have that opportunity, that's a good thing to take advantage of. Yeah.
And I know our situation was unique, but it has been just really, really helpful for her, even in her learning to own her own callings and faith in God. Because, for example, she was able to go to Africa this past spring, and when she came back to her youth group, she got to share about her mission experience in Africa, and that was something completely separate than oh, come tell us about what your parents do in Russia. This was like her own thing that she got to share about, and it made her stop and have to think through her testimony, and it was really cool. She had nothing to lean on, I guess. She couldn't lean on our stories because we are not a part of that church. They don't know us. And so she really had to articulate and be able to express how God moved in her life in Africa.
So in that way, the recommendation there for a kid is kind of getting them out of the spotlight a little bit.
Yeah.
To grow in different ways.
Yeah.
So, additionally, right, besides spiritual support, practical support can also be another possibility that you can get through the church. Maybe through a financial crisis, a church or churches will help a pastor or missionary family. So that's another thing. Relational support also can happen through meetups and with other ministerial families. I know ideally, right, we try to meet up with other families in the ministry. We just had family friends over from our time in Russia. Those are special friends. I mean, in terms of, they're probably the closest family we've gotten to through ministry, and just personally. So that's a special friendship, which is good to have those times as well. But even like people who are more local to you, we're still good friends with, and we try to meet up with them periodically when we can get our schedules together. But I think that relational support is helpful and possible even while you're pastoring or serving in the ministry.
Yeah, and I think that where we live are probably pretty blessed because we have a lot of pastors and like families, ministry families that are similar to us. I mean, there are several that are not, obviously, but there are several pastor families that are very similar to us, and so it's easy for us to get together and to have a meal and to feel, rejuvenated at the end of the meal, like uplifted. But even if that's not an option where you live, there are things like the minister meetup that you do online. Things like that, I think, can be really helpful.
Yeah, chat communities, sometimes Zoom discussions. Those opportunities are available just for that connection when you are in areas that are more isolated and don't have that network close to you geographically.
Yeah. And again, a lot of our relational, like years of my personal, like relationships that uplift us, or people pouring into us, I guess, come outside of the church. I know we've discussed this in other podcasts, but a lot of my closest friends are not in our church. They're not even in the ABA. They're not even in our association of churches. And I guess it's kind of avoiding the spotlight, but I think it is a really good thing to touch on, because although you may be in the spotlight in your church, you're not in the spotlight in the whole, community. You're not, there's pockets where people don't know who you are. And so, having people that you can just be yourself with, I think it's really important.
For sure. Yeah, being yourself with people, being authentic with people. And we've talked, like you said, in the previous episodes about authenticity and the challenges of that in church with church members. But it's like a different level of authenticity and connection you can have with those who are serving in ministry without the concern of how this is going to affect my ability to lead in this church setting.
Yeah, because people outside of your church are not leading, right? You're not responsible for them or anything, right. So you're definitely able to have a different type of relationship with them.
Sure. So these are some of the support and types of support and help you can get while in the spotlight more. But different types of help can be more difficult to get while in the spotlight. For instance, emotional and mental health support, that's a big one. Support for burnout, parenting, marriage, transitions. Those are a lot more difficult to get while in the spotlight, I feel. And some of that is really just due to lack of availability to get that kind of help while having to be in that routine and have that responsibility to lead in a church or to lead as a missionary, not being able to pull away from that or even find that type of help while you're in that setting. I mean, it's hard for a pastor or missionary family to get help for their mental health while they're serving. It's hard to open up about that kind of thing. I've heard of, stories, unfortunately, of people opening up. I think that part's not unfortunate. That's great. But the unfortunate part is like people kind of at that point after they open up, kind of looking down on them, like, oh man, he's, they're really going through a rough patch, or judging them and not looking at them with the same respect and in the same light as they should a pastor for spiritual guidance and shepherding. And that's a shame, because we're all sinners, and not only we're all sinners, we're all broken in different ways. And sometimes, our physical health is struggling, sometimes our emotional health, sometimes our spiritual health, sometimes our mental health. And so it's more important to get help and not to feel like you have to hide that and cover it up and then just be unhealthy and pretend to be healthy.
And I think maybe even a bigger problem we may see is like people not coming to the conclusion that they need help until it's way too late. And like that's not them trying to seek out help. That's just them not wanting to admit that they are in a downward spiral. And so I think pastors' wives, missionary wives need to understand that that you may need help if you're experiencing things that maybe are changing. Maybe you're more angry than what you typically are. Maybe you're more impulsive. Maybe you have trouble forgiving people. Maybe you don't trust people like you used to. All of these things, they are not godly things. These are things that we should work on. We should get better at. And I think admitting that hey, this is something that I may need help with, is sometimes really hard for us to do. And then secondly, with the judging, it's so sad, because I think it's a lack of faith, right? When somebody comes in and tells, I have to fight it myself. Like when I hear a really horrible story, like somebody will come to us and they'll tell us this really horrible story, and like my heart immediately just wants to like be deflated a little bit. But then I have to remind myself that our God heals and our God can make new, and that is the beauty of hurting, I think, is that God can take hurting and change it into something good, and grow us. But I think sometimes when we can hear these stories and lack the faith that God can fix it, God can make it better. And so I think that even people that are struggling with these things, they feel like it's going to be forever, right? And it can keep you from wanting to get help. But reality is that God can heal. God can fix that.
Mm-hmm. And so we should, ideally have the atmosphere. In an ideal world, an ideal church, we would have the atmosphere and the personality that this is a place of healing. And even when people know that, I think, unfortunately, even if they may be more accepting of somebody who's not in church leadership going through those that getting that help, than they are of somebody who's in church leadership getting that help. But it shouldn't be that way, and a lot of that's vision casting and just preaching well, teaching well, being open with people, and authentic to the terms of like, we're all sinners, we all have struggles, we're all in this together. Church is a team effort, pastor and member combined, leadership and all members combined, and not, we're a body. We're the body of Christ working together, and one part isn't more important than the other part. We're all important, and in that we can all suffer, and none of us is immune to that. And I think when you look at it more as a team effort, and just because a pastoral family is struggling doesn't mean they're disqualified to be a pastor, but it could mean that they need help, and you should try to get them help or help them.
Yeah. I think that above reproach, right? That term gets used a lot, especially when you're talking about pastors and families. But I mean, what does that actually mean? Above reproach doesn't mean that you don't have problems. It just means, that God has set them apart, right? So I think it's a fallacy that we think that just because God's called families to be ministerial families, that that they are somehow immune to these things. And I think, like, I'm talking to us too, like as missionaries and pastors, we have to accept these truths ourselves. Like, I think that it's easy looking on the outside and saying, oh man, they need help. But the people, pastors and missionaries and their families, y'all, like, we need to understand that, like, we will need help. Like, it's not an if. It will happen.
Right.
We're not made to be solo creatures.
For sure. We need help. We need mentoring. We need discipleship. We need people pouring into us, and we need to be able to go to people for help. We're probably struggling with pride if have gone our whole lives without looking for help anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, or we're just not being truthful with ourselves. Right?
Or we got help and we didn't realize it.
Or that, yeah, that as well. So, yeah, I mean, that's mental health, emotional health, but what about, I mean, parenting and marriage struggles also are hard to get help with while in the spotlight, right? You know, a marriage is struggling. Well, you definitely can't be mentioning anything about that in a church setting, or they may see you're struggling with your kids, and they'll, you know, judge you for it, likely, because, you know, you're supposed to have your home in order, and, you know, that is a characteristic of a pastor that you should look for. But there's seasons where people are in disorder, and if somebody's in disorder, then that's going to affect the whole family. And so, you know, 100% of the time, if everything's in order, then man, you're perfect, and that's just not who we are. And so, nor is it what we can be. So, like, we need to make sure our standards are biblical, that we're not like putting unbiblical standards on ourselves. But we also need to make sure that we are willing to admit, hey, you know, yeah, we're not doing well as a family, we're not doing well as a couple, we need help. And even if, you know, again, it's not something you have to necessarily publicize, but you can get help. It is possible. It is possible in certain situations to get marriage counseling, to get family counseling while still, you know, being in ministry. That is a possibility. You don't have to leave ministry to work on those things. Yeah.
I mean, you're telling me when you're called into ministry, God didn't hand you the handbook on how to have a perfect marriage with me, and how to raise Hattie perfectly, and how to raise Gideon and Tobias perfectly. You didn't all of a sudden have all this knowledge. I wish it worked that way, but it doesn't work that way. And yeah, I think that if you get the help, right? So like, say your marriage is maybe going through a rough patch. If you get the help while it's in the rough patch, instead of letting it continue to fester and not getting that help, you know, you have a chance to save both your ministry and your marriage, right? But when you don't get that help, and, you know, all of a sudden, like, your marriage is falling apart and your family is falling apart, yeah, that's more into play when, like, you may have to take a step back from ministry to mend your family. So it's a lot easier and better in the long run if you do those little small checks with your marriage along the way, instead of letting it snowball into a catastrophe.
Right. And how do you know, now since we're on that topic, how do you do those small checks? I mean, obviously you can do them while you're still serving in ministry. One of the big things, which I think it's good, like, are these assessments for missionaries. I think they should also do them for pastors as well. I mean, because the reality is, you know, you're about to go into ministry, and the idea is they're in those assessments. They're searching for, experts are looking for areas of potential struggle that you should work on and get in order before serving in ministry or going on the mission field. And that's because, as we know, right, all of your struggles are more evident, and they become bigger when you get into ministry. They become more obvious to others as well, and to yourself. And so that's one of the things about ministry. And so getting that help ahead of time is why it's just like premarital counseling is also wise, like equipping yourself in that way. But like, it's definitely not the thing like, oh, I've done that, so I'm good. You know what I mean? Like, you've done that, yeah, you're good to start, but
Right.
it's not like you're indefinitely fine. It's not like you're indefinitely immune from problems.
Right.
You know, it's like don't give yourself a false sense of security because you passed an assessment. Also, don't puff yourself up, right? Like, the reality is like you're still going to have struggles.
You're finding
and you're
that
still
moment.
going to need help.
Yeah.
Like I mean, if you're able, if as a married couple and in a family, if y'all are willing to work on it and able to work on it when you're still together and still serving, that's potential for a beautiful picture of restoration and healing and growth that even our churches need to see, and the people we're witnessing to need to see. It becomes a problem when we push it aside, we don't address it, and then suddenly the relationship is beyond repair, because then it also is disqualifying for ministry, and it prohibits the ability to really minister as we should in that context we've been in. And so,
Yeah. So I think that a marriage is gonna always be, ebbs and like it's not gonna be always great and always bad. You go through seasons, just like everything else.
just like your spiritual life, it's not linear sanctification, it's progressive sanctification. It's not linear in how good our marriage is, it's progressive, right? Ideally it's getting better, but with peaks and valleys.
Yeah. So I think like understanding that all of our marriages are doing that. If they're healthy, okay, I mean, like, I guess you can have a pretty unhealthy marriage and you could stay pretty linear, where you're just like, your marriage just doesn't ever really grow or get worse. You just stay the same, but the reality,
That's stagnant.
yeah, it's not very fulfilling. But I think that marriages are gonna have their ups and downs, and so I think there's a normalcy in that. I mean, I'm not saying that you have to reach out to somebody every time you're having a rough spot in your marriage. I think that would be a little excessive. But I think that it is good to talk to somebody, like as a friend or somebody that you can trust, because
It may be more than one person.
Yeah, because more than likely they have gone through maybe not similar problems, but similar feelings or similar.
They've gone through problems themselves.
Right, and so
Right.
it's not only maybe helpful for you, but it can be encouraging for you
Yeah,
also.
someone to mentor you.
Yeah. So I mean, it's difficult sometimes to find a good mentor, but they are. And again, I think looking outside of just your own church and just outside
Right.
the ABA maybe, expanding your
Right. Scope.
Yeah, to larger areas. I mean, there are really great couples out there. So.
Right. But all of us are always immune, right? All couples are not immune. Sorry. All couples are not immune to problems.
Yeah, for sure.
And there will be problems, it's just a matter of addressing them. So, finances, we mentioned how that could be something that there could be help with in a financial crisis, but finances can also, like getting financial help. What if your church or ministry is struggling financially? You're struggling financially personally, so that's a very real situation that a lot of pastors and missionaries have dealt with or will deal with or are dealing with. And so how can they navigate getting that help? I mean, there's still, you can get coaching, you can get financial coaching, there's a lot of financial resources out there for help, but then it also means you have to be transparent with your church. You might have to say, hey, I need to get some things in order. I might need to get a part-time job, something like that, if your pay isn't up to what it needs to be. A lot, not all, but a lot of people in ministry are underpaid for what they do. And a lot of them are not paid enough to like live well without constantly thinking about tight budgets, and anything out of the ordinary can put them in a huge bind, just like a lot of people in the world right now. It's not just people in ministry, but this is all over the place. But it can be a little bit of a challenge, right, for a missionary overseas. I mean, they don't have an option to pick up another job, or even a pastor, if the expectation is you're our pastor, full time, 24/7 availability, pretty much.
Or they're in an area that there's just really not a lot of
other work.
Yeah.
Then it's like, well, what are they going to do? What can they do in that situation? So, like I said, financial coaching. What are some other thoughts about how they might get through financial struggles while in the spotlight?
Yeah, I think that if a pastor is willing, or a ministry family is willing to talk and admit that to the church should be very sensitive to what they're saying, because that's not an easy thing for most people to admit. And then, trying to get to the heart of the issue would be important. Are they underpaid? Or maybe they have, more of a spending issue, or, and instead of looking at this as, greed or a catastrophe, trying to work with them to come up with a better solution. And just having that heart of understanding, I think it's just really important. Obviously, we need accountability, but there's also a level of trust that I think we have to implement with our pastors and our missionaries too.
Right.
And so I think it's hard. That's a tricky one.
I like and hate publishing financial reports for ministry, because you're being open and authentic, and transparent with what you're doing, and people can judge you for it, but they can also see, hey, he's, they're being responsible. This is they really do need more support, or they could misinterpret the financial report and think, oh yeah, look, they're doing okay, but the reality is if everyone took that approach, then they wouldn't have enough support, as a missionary family. And so, it's a struggle to communicate about those things. Sometimes I think about that constantly when I'm, trying to communicate needs as a missionary. I think other missionaries can relate. Are people, hopefully, right, where churches are praying about these needs and they see it as you're just trying to communicate what you feel you need to do the calling God has put on you, and you're trusting God to provide, and you don't get the judgment of, oh man, he's spent this much in this way, or did it really cost that much to live and go to that place, or those, if there are those thoughts, I think it's important to have those conversations with the missionary, in love though, because in the worst case, bitterness develops in people's hearts, right? Judging, maybe even misunderstanding what missionaries are going through financially, and that just leads to all other sorts of issues, what the missionary doesn't want, God doesn't want, and churches shouldn't want. And so it is a really challenging, touchy subject to get help with while in the spotlight.
I mean, specifically with missionaries, if we kind of follow the formula that we've set out for missionaries, missionaries sent out from the ABA. You have your missionary, then you have your sending church, and funds should go through the sending church to the missionary. We have this idea that the sending church is keeping our missionaries accountable,
right?
And so there is a level of maybe some discussion between the missionary and their sending church, but that is done because it's from their sending church, ideally that sending church already trusts and loves that missionary enough that there is the heart of the person or the pastor or the mission committee, whoever's going to talk to that missionary, the heart of them is already at a place where, it's not combative. They're not going in there to, completely annihilate a missionary, right? Maybe there are times where we may have to be questioned. I mean, that's not a bad thing, right? And but I think that having a sending church that can do that in love, and then with the missionary, understand if the relationship is good, and maybe maybe the missionary hasn't heard from their sending church in 6 months, and then all of a sudden the only communication they get from their sending church is this question about this expense. That's
so discouraging and deflating. I mean, it's not even from sending churches, but partnering churches. When you hear like, oh yeah, there's discussion over whether we should keep supporting you, like that kind of stuff is so deflating. And you're trying, with regular reports to communicate. You're trying to get out periodically to their church to communicate. And on top of all that, you're more than willing to answer any questions that they may have anytime. And so it is a rough feeling to get that, to be in that kind of situation and trying to get that help that you need because of. I mean, why is it difficult? In general, as we kind of transition more, into this question, why is it difficult for ministerial families to get help while in the spotlight? Why is it difficult? I mean, we talked on judgment, some possible loss of support, right, for missionaries and even pastors, right, buy-in into vision, right, possible even loss of that position as a missionary or as a pastor.
I think basically you just summed it all up. Why is it hard for pastoral and missionary families to get help that they need? Because if they come and ask for help, they are literally putting their whole life at risk. Everything they've worked for years and years and years, that
Degrees,
they feel God has led them to.
Sacrifice.
Yeah.
Preparation.
They are putting that all
stepping out in faith
on the line.
Yeah.
To ask for help.
Right.
And so, I mean, that is a huge ask.
Which is crazy.
I mean, imagine.
In any other profession.
Exactly.
It's okay.
Can you imagine, I imagine, I know some people listen that are not pastors or missionary families, but imagine if your child is super suffering with things, like their mental health is just really struggling.
Which happens all the time. It's
and you're terrified.
All families all over the world.
Right. And you're terrified to get them help for what, because it could make you lose your job and lose your livelihood and lose your calling. Lose what you felt God has led you to do. To get what do you choose? Do you choose to get your kid that help, or do you choose to keep try to keep with your calling? What do you do?
It's very hard. It's very hard. My encouragement to anybody listening. And of course, I'm 38 years old, so I still hopefully have a lot of years left. But I've been in the ministry for quite some time now. Been through a lot of experiences, continually learning and getting more experiences. But I've also talked to a lot of others who are even more experienced than I am, and my encouragement to you listening and anybody in that situation would be to put your family above your position, right? God's first and then others. It's never a thing that's elevated above a person. And so I think it's very biblical, right? Love God, love others. The positions can come and go. God promises to provide when we put him first, and I think by showing love to your family by putting them over a position is biblical, and God will bless that. But it might be really hard to see and understand that, especially if you have Christian people that don't see it that way and don't get the full situation. And even worse, a lot of times, especially being in the spotlight, you can't communicate all the details. Right? I mean, even in our churches, people they have unspoken prayer requests. Why? Because they don't want to share the details for a variety of reasons, and maybe they don't want to hurt somebody or potentially hurt somebody or cause someone else problems. And so it's very important to not ever idolize the position over a person.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I mean, it kind of helps answer that question. It doesn't make it any easier.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's you want to know, just get down to the very basis of it. It's because you can lose everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess if we move past that and we are going to address, so what do they do?
Yeah. So what do ministerial families do to get the kinds of very much needed help that they have, those needs when they come up while they're in the spotlight? And I think there's a couple of passages that I'd like to bring out for this discussion. We're not going to read them, but we are going to reference them and hit some of what's going on in them. The first one is 1 Kings chapter 19 and the first 18 verses, and this is when discussing Elijah. Elijah had just fled in fear for his life, and God sent an angel to care for him, to feed him. He had some time to rest, he had some time for recovery before he was sent out again. And it wasn't just like, hey Elijah, you're here, get back to work. Why did you flee? It's like, here, I care for you, I'm going to be kind to you, I'm going to feed you, I'm going to give you some time to rest, I'm going to give you some time to recover and rest before I just throw you back out into the field. And so I think of that as like a temporary leave situation, or even like to the point of just a vacation, depending on the type of vacation and the length, a sabbatical, retreats. These are all examples of this time away. And the thing is, though, about that time away, you have to be very careful with it, because if you don't use that time well, like if the time is spent doing things that aren't healthy or beneficial in any way, right? Like maybe the healthy, beneficial time you need is just to get away, relax, refresh. But if you spend that time with unhealthy habits and you don't resolve some things and work on some things that you should work on and try to resolve during that time, then it could mean like that temporary leave becomes a permanent leave. And that's not necessarily, what we're shooting for. So there's people out there's like sabbatical coaches and just, again, mentors that can help walk you through when you need to take a temporary leave, when you need to take an extended time away, away from a ministry position, or at least not, you're still in the position, but maybe you're not in the day-to-day responsibilities.
So this would be good things for churches to also, just church members to be aware of.
Right.
When it's great if a church is, I can only think of a very few churches that send their pastors on a sabbatical, allow their pastors to go on a sabbatical.
Right.
But for one, if you haven't and you have a long-term pastor, I would check in with them and see how they're doing. Maybe they need some time away.
And missionaries, by the way, should have furloughs, and those furloughs just shouldn't be all replacement work.
Right. But also, sabbatical coaches cost money.
Right.
So if you send your pastor on a sabbatical and then see if the church can put in the funds to help cover a sabbatical coach for him. I know it seems like it's a huge cost, but you have to kind of look at it as an investment.
Right.
Because imagine, sending your pastor away and they come back really rejuvenated, almost like when they first came to your church, where they are excited again about ministry and they have plans and God is
refreshed vision, refreshed hopes, refreshed focus, physically refreshed, spiritually refreshed, emotionally refreshed. Even if they're not 100%, if they're just better and more encouraged, that's a huge win.
Yeah, it's a success.
Right.
So this can go out to just church members to be thinking about and plan for. I know our church.
Yeah, they do.
We have after 5 years, right,
Right.
of service,
A
you
1 month
have a 1 month sabbatical.
And then 10 years, I think I don't know offhand, maybe it just seems so far away at this point. Like 3 months or something. So, I mean, there is a development, a progression.
Yeah.
The longer you stay, the longer the sabbatical.
So, which that's that could be something that you think that churches think about as they're hiring people. Okay, so, when this pastor's been at our church for 5 years, we're going to give them a 1 month sabbatical, and it gives you time to plan for that too, right? So you have 5 years to come up with what are you going to do for that month of not having your pastor.
Sure.
So I'm not.
So it shouldn't catch anybody by surprise,
right?
When they're not there for a month.
So it's a lot better to do that than have your pastor burn out, I think.
100%. Yeah, temporary leave versus permanent leave, and in that temporary leave, it's important to have an end date in mind, right? Even if it's an adjustable end date by a little bit, like you can't. I would caution against taking leave without there being a plan of like at this date I'm gonna start getting back in, even if it's a gradual progression back in. When we're talking about an extended leave.
Well, and it's also good to mention a pastor that's getting to take a sabbatical just because they're like it's time to take a sabbatical versus a pastor having to take leave because they're burned out. They're two very different things.
Right.
One, a month is definitely going to be enough time for a sabbatical for a relatively healthy pastor that just needs some time to replenish.
Yeah.
Somebody that's in burnout, a month is probably not going to be enough time.
Right.
It's going to take them a month to decompress, everything that they've gone through.
Yeah, it'd be more likely 2 or 3 months or more.
And so it's much better to kind of build these into your...
To prevent burnout. Help prevent burnout.
It's a lot worse. And the likelihood of pastors coming back after burnout is also lower.
Mm-hmm. It's lower, yeah.
So, and that's obviously something we would love to avoid is men that are called from God that have served for years and years and years burn out to the extent where they don't want to do ministry anymore.
Right. So, second passage I'd like to get into some on this topic of what ministerial families can do to get this kind of help while in the spotlight is 2 Corinthians 7, 5 through 7. And so, but before we get into that, one quick point, that temporary leave, it is kind of getting out of the spotlight a little bit. You're still there and that you're in the position, but there's not as much focus on you in those moments. So
kind of hearing a theme here. In order to get help in the spotlight, you have to get out of the spotlight.
At least a little bit, maybe not completely, right? Yeah. So 2 Corinthians 7, 5 through 7. We can, since it's just a short section here, we can read it. It says, "In fact, when we came to Macedonia, we had no rest. Instead, we were troubled in every way. Conflicts on the outside, fears inside. But God, who comforts the humble, comforted us by the arrival of Titus. And not only by his arrival, but also by the comfort he received from you. He told us about your deep longing, your sorrow, and your zeal for me, so that I rejoiced even more." So here, it's a reality of no rest. It's hard. There's conflict on the outside. There's fears inside. It's a troubling, hard season of ministry. And yet, Paul still is doing the ministry, and then here comes Titus. Titus enters the picture, another person. And so Paul is able to keep serving, but Titus comes alongside him as an encouragement for this season. And, I think of things like our Heartway ministry, but not just that, but there's others that can also be encouraging to you and come in and encourage you in these seasons. While you're still in the spotlight, they can come alongside you.
Yeah. And it's so much more than just working, right? It's not coming in helping you take work away from you. It's coming in bringing you peace.
Right.
Like the feeling that you're not in it alone.
Encouragement, presence.
And to remind you that God sees you and loves you. Like this is not, it's not you against all these conflicts.
Right.
Because I mean, there's that fear. You talked about the fear. Like fear because what if the conflicts go badly, right? What if, that church member leaves, and your biggest fear is that, oh my goodness, we're not going to have enough tithe now to, pay our staff. Right? So that's fear. And then you have this peace come in with the understanding that God will provide this
God's
if you're in your spot.
Yeah.
So it's like this, it's not so much about doing, it's like this inner, it's like the fruit of the spirits. It's a peace that you can't understand and you can't explain away.
Yeah. And so, of course it can happen through, specifically ministry people that have that care ministry coming in and helping. In the ABA there's a few of us, but not many. But in other organizations, if you're listening in another organization, you might have more of that, and that's awesome. But even like for those of you who maybe it's like I don't know like if that's gonna work. I don't know if that's a possibility. And you're just trying to get something quick, like just reaching out. And people do this, and I encourage you to do it. Just reach out to someone that's also in ministry, that's an encourager that you can just talk to on the phone, even like for encouragement. Let them be your Titus, and maybe you should also seek to be the Titus for other people, or you're just looking for people that need encouragement to encourage them, to give them a better perspective, a different perspective on what they're going through, because it feels isolating when you're going through these troubles alone.
Sometimes just listening. I mean, like honestly, I know it sounds so like silly, but I mean you hear it all the time. But just listening, like I don't think she'll mind me saying this, but like Amber Strader, I really love Amber, and she thinks sometimes that she talks too much about herself when we're talking, but I love it. Like she'll come in and just it happens on Sunday nights, because we both do an Awanas, but we both get there a little early, and so it's one of our only times that we don't have a million things pulling us away. I'm getting my stuff ready for my cubby's class, and Amber will come in and just kind of unload about her week. I want to know about her week. And this past week, she's like, I'm sorry, all I've talked about is myself. And it doesn't bother me at all. Like, I love getting to sit and listen to her about everything that's going on in her life. And I pray that, just being able to hear it, like have somebody hear her and, understand, the struggles that she's going through can uplift her for the next week. That it's, just enough to keep her going and doing what God's called her to do.
So just, for people listening, if somebody in ministry comes and starts talking to you, just, listen to them, let them talk, encourage them to talk. And in doing that, you can be a Titus to ministerial families while they're in the spotlight.
Let them know that you enjoy, they're not a burden, that they're not, who cares if they only talk about themselves? It's not a big deal, right?
Yeah.
So can I share a personal story?
I don't know. Yeah, sure you can.
I think it's good because, right, we have to be open, right? And so, I mean, Jodie, obviously, I love being married to Jodie. Like, I feel like our relationship, our marriage is very strong now. Like, he is the person I want to be with all the time, so they, talk about how you're, a husband girl sometimes I would see the reels or whatever on Facebook or TikTok, and that's definitely me. Like, if I have a choice to be Jodie or somebody else in the world, it's going to be Jodie. But anyways, our marriage hasn't always been like that. It's been something that thankfully God has grown. But there was a time in Russia specifically. I think it was after I had Tobias. So of course there was some postpartum going on. So definitely some depression on my side. And there was definitely some strong depression on Jodie's side also during this time. And I'm sure we've probably talked about it in other ways, but male depression presents very differently than female depression. So there's anger and, of course, sadness on my part. Withdrawal, yeah. And it was like very
little laughter.
Yeah, it was heavy outside. It was heavy in Russia. It was heavy with people. There was so much stress going on. People were getting kicked out of the country. There was, it was just really heavy. And I remember we had an argument or something, and I was done. Like, I was done with Russia. I was done with our marriage. I was ready to pack up my bags and my kids' bags, and I was going back home. And I told Jodie that. And then I told him 30 days. I'll give you 30 days. And if there isn't something different in 30 days, then I'm out of here. I'm not staying. And so then began a really rough couple of weeks. And it's funny because I can't even remember if Jodie changed in that time period. I do remember reaching out and nobody being able to talk to me or help me during that period. I remember specifically trying to talk to people, and they just, they were busy and couldn't talk to me. So I definitely felt horribly alone. And I really felt like I had no other option but give that ultimatum. And during those days, I don't remember if Jodie changed or not. I don't remember if he changed or not.
I don't know. Don't ask me. I don't even remember the 30-day thing. I remember you telling, I remember how serious it got.
In the end, I remember I changed, which is always ironic, right? I remember my perspective on how I needed to look at Jodie changed so much, and it didn't even take 30 days. I think in the first couple of weeks, my perspective of looking at Jodie changed so drastically. I wrote a short story or an explanation of how I had changed, and maybe I'll post it someday about it, because even today when I read it, I'm like, oh man, that brings all the feels back for me. But I do remember how lonely and hard it was not having anybody and trying to do all of this by myself. And I don't think anybody should have to go through things like that by themselves. Now thankfully I have Jodie to go through too with my problems. What happened, at that moment, Jodie and I, that was the problem. And we were in Russia, and there wasn't a church body I could go to. All of the believers there are young believers. It's not like I could go to them with my marital problems.
Right.
And so having to walk these things alone, that is something that's why Heartway is here. Jodie
Right.
and I don't want anybody to have to walk through these things alone or feel like they don't have an option to talk to somebody.
Judgment free.
It is completely judgment free. It's
Confidential and judgment free.
yeah. Something I like to share because I talk obviously mostly to women, and things that I like to share in our first session is that I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to believe you, and I'm going to trust your what you're telling me, but I also want you to understand that I also understand that it's your perspective, and I'm not going to judge your husband based off of what you're telling me. And for a lot of women, that's really freeing, right? Because we don't want to talk badly about our husbands. We love our husbands, but we may have issues, right? Things
Right.
that we need to work on, and a lot of that is admitting faults in both our spouse and ourselves. And so, yes, our ministry is judgment-free. We're not here to judge you. We are here to walk alongside you. We've been there. So, yeah, that's my little personal story to add to this.
Well, I didn't know you were going to do that, but I'm glad that it worked out.
Are you glad I did it? Or are you just glad it worked out?
No, I'm glad that our marriage worked out. and we were able to stay on the field there and stick together without having to separate any. So that was like it was hard, but it was worth it.
Yeah, definitely.
But like you said, with a care and support team and people around, like that would have been a lot better. I wouldn't necessarily say easy. It would have been easier too, but it would have been a lot better, healthier to navigate.
Yeah, because it could have very easily gone the other way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thankful.
And it
to God
does.
That,
It has gone that way for people. You know, and you know, some people look at that and they think, you know, I'm immune. That would never happen in my relationship. That would never happen in my situation. And I think, like at that point, you're giving yourself a sort of false sense of security, because really no person, no relationship is immune to troubles, and they can just, if they're not dealt with, they can, you know, get to a point you never thought they would get to, you know. And sometimes the marital problems just aren't necessarily just marital problems. They're, you know, personal problems that you need to work through that are manifesting into marital problems or causing relational problems because of personal things that you need to work on that you aren't working on, that you need to deal with that you haven't dealt with.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad it worked out too. I like being married to you.
Same here. So I'm glad we are a team. All right. So, and I don't have to record this podcast alone.
Yeah,
so
that's
that
right.
makes it better too. So yeah, this is. I hope it's been helpful. We're glad that we were able to record another podcast and look forward to the next one in this series, this season. And until next time, this is Heartway, where we seek to help with issues at the source.